Anytime because I was in boarding house, I'm going to school. They give me money.
For a long time, left my home. So my father and my mother don't know where about me. So I do go to Meduguri, Kano. I was driving in Sapla garage. From there, my father bought 504 for me. Then I was working.
The morning of March 29th, 1987, did not arrive with the usual tropical warmth of Benin City. Instead, it carried a heavy, humid dread that seemed to settle in the lungs of every spectator gathered at the execution ground. Thousands of people had squeezed into every available inch of space, standing on the roofs of cars and clinging to the branches of trees, all to witness the final moments of the man who had humbled the Nigerian police force. At the center of this grim theater was Lawrence Anini, a man once so feared that his very name could clear a street in seconds, now slumped in a wooden chair because his amputated leg could no longer support the weight of his sins. Beside him stood his cold-blooded shadow, Monday Osunbor, both men stripped of their bulletproof charms and the aura of invincibility that had fueled their reign of terror. The air was thick with the scent of dust, sweat, and the metallic tang of the rifles held by the firing squad as the transition from legendary bandit to dead man began. As the military commander gave the signal, the crowd fell into a silence so profound you could hear the rustle of the palm fronds in the distance. Anini, the man who called himself the Law, stared blankly at the horizon, perhaps remembering the days he spent throwing stolen naira notes into the air at the market, or perhaps realizing that no amount of stolen wealth could buy back his life. The soldiers raised their rifles with a synchronized precision that felt like a final insult to the chaos Anini had sowed across Bendel State for years. In that singular, terrifying moment, the reality of the consequence finally eclipsed the thrill of the crime as the nation watched the ultimate price of a life lived by the gun. When the order to fire was finally shouted, the volley of bullets did more than just end 2 lives. It closed a dark chapter of Nigerian history that had seen the very foundation of law and order shaken to its core. The echoes of the gunfire signaled the end of a nightmare that had lasted nearly a year, leaving 20 people dead, including 11 police officers, and an entire nation traumatized. This execution was not just a punishment for robbery, it was a ritual of exorcism for a society that had seen its police officers hunted like prey and its streets ruled by a 26-year-old former taxi driver. Lawrence Anini died that morning, but the questions his life raised, questions of corruption, poverty, and the failure of justice, would linger long after his body was taken away. The legend of the Law was over, but the story of how a simple man from the village of Ororgo became the most hunted criminal in Africa is one that still haunts the collective memory of Nigeria. To understand the bullets at the stake, we must travel back to the dusty garages of Benin, where the transformation began, and where a taxi driver first decided that the law was an obstacle he was meant to drive over. Long before he was a headline, Lawrence Anini was a man of the steering wheel, a skilled taxi driver who knew the winding roads and hidden alleys of Benin City better than the back of his own hand. He was a product of the rough-and-tumble motor parks, where survival meant being faster, smarter, and more ruthless than the next man in line. It was in these garages that he met Monday Osunbor, a man whose quiet, calculating nature served as the perfect ballast to Anini's flamboyant energy. While Anini was the face and the voice, Osunbor was the mechanic of violence, a man who understood the psychology of fear and the tactical advantage of a well-placed shot. They weren't born as monsters, they were forged in an environment of economic stagnation and social neglect, where the line between a hustler and a criminal was as thin as a single naira note. They began with petty thefts and small-time heists, testing the limits of the local authorities and finding, much to their surprise, that the walls of the city were far more porous than they had ever imagined. As their partnership solidified, their ambitions grew from stealing car parts to hijacking lorries and raiding the homes of the wealthy. Anini's intimate knowledge of the transport networks allowed them to move through the state like ghosts, striking with a precision that left the police chasing shadows and the public whisper-singing their names. They weren't just robbers, they were becoming symbols of a deeper rot, a manifestation of the anger felt by those left behind by the oil boom. Yet it was the recruitment of their most important member that truly escalated their operation to a national crisis. This was not a fellow criminal from the streets, but a man inside the uniform, Deputy Superintendent of Police George Iyamu. Iyamu provided the one thing every criminal empire needs, the shield of official protection and the steady supply of government-issued ammunition. With a DSP on their payroll, Anini and Osunbor weren't just a gang anymore, they were a paramilitary force operating with the blessing of the very people meant to stop them. We are seeing how the unholy trinity of Anini, Osunbor, and Iyamu began their rise to power. In your opinion, who is more dangerous, the criminal in the street or the corrupt officer in the office? Write your answer in the comments below. With Iyamu providing intelligence and weapons, the gang began to target the police force itself, a move that was as psychological as it was tactical. They didn't just want the money, they wanted to prove that the police were powerless, that the law was Lawrence, not the government. Every hijacked patrol car and every murdered officer was a message sent to the IG of police and the military governors. The air in Benin City became a tangible thing, a heavy fog that descended every evening as shops closed early and residents barricaded their doors with iron bars. This was the era where the legend of Anini's charms began to root, stories that he could disappear into thin air or turn bullets into water. But while the public looked for magic, Anini and Osunbor were relying on something much realer, the cowardice of a compromised police force and the brutal efficiency of a team that had nothing left to lose.
When in your life did you know that you were going to craft national robbery and all? When did you start noticing that you probably end up in business?
So when will I?
When in your life, when you were growing up,
Yes.
you know, something must have been happening. You didn't just start stealing.
No.
Something was happening and you were going towards stealing.
Nothing happened. My family were treating me well. And anytime because I was in boarding house, I'm going to school. They give me money. They make sure I don't move with bad company. They tell me with me different things. They even if at least they drop me, at least they buy me things. So I remember they said I should repeat. So I changed. So when I met this man, the area, so I was following him for car snatching. Then later I discovered that it is a nice business. Then I took over the business myself. Then I left him. Later I was with some girl. After working for some time, then I met Lawrence, where I entered to robbery.
To make them want to know who you be and why you are what you are. You understand? So we want you to tell us everything about Lawrence Anini. So first of all, we want to know about you. How old are you, your name, when you were born, and everything about your family?
Well, for me, I can't give the actual date I was born. I can't give the date which
Speak pidgin English.
I can't give the date when I'm delivered. Why? For a long time I've left my home. So my father and my mother don't know where about me. So I do go to Maiduguri, Kano, different states. So during that time I was a trailer driver to Sasco. Sasco in Benin. I drive trailer for Sasco for some years. So from there, I have to switch out, start carry vehicle. Once you park vehicle, with the load I can carry it, then I sell it. Then during that time, Lasisi, one man with bone head, former Oga Parapata, just as some officers be there.
Oga Parapata for where?
State CID, that is Lasisi. So that man was the man that arrested me in that period. Then I was doing that job complete 3 years or 4 years. Then after from there, so I have many friends. I have many friends. Then through there, when I stopped driving, my father buy a bus for me. A bus, that is a van where I used to drive. So I was driving in Sapler garage. From there, my father bought 504 for me. Then I was working. So later on, when I get to Warri, got an accident. So I was admitted. Before I come back, my father gave up. So from there, then I entered to my business again. Then I met one big lorry, full loaded of medicine at Ebony Lima. Then I carried that lorry. Then when I carry that lorry, I drive it out, I sell it. I drive the car to Iyamu. Then I sell the lorry with the load. Then the whole money was 50,000, which I buy the goods. So from there, the man we sold it for, he gave us 20,000 at the time. After small time, then this man, he organized for us that he's not going to pay the money. Then he have to use police people to arrest us. I was only the person that escaped out of 3 of us. I escaped down to Benin. Then I treat myself with the beating. Then from there, then from there, they come arrest me in my father's compound. I said, whether did I know all those boys? I said, well, it's a trailer driver. I remember myself, I'm a trailer driver. I don't know what is really happening now. So when I come talk to them like that, they come carry me go where? Carry me reach over and I come give my statement. Then why did they shot me by hand here? They shot me by hand to give statement and with my leg to give a full statement that I know something concerning it. That the whole money, who is the goods value? Then they said now they will just carry the whole goods. They are not going to pay us the balance money. Then from there, they condemn the rest 2 boys. Then they charge me since I don't have connection with it. So from there, they have to leave me. I come home. When I come home, then they arrested me too concerning our bar case. That I went there to steal a lorry with beer. That I sold the beer in Kaduna.
From the Abbas Palace?
No, not from the palace. For here you are the distributor. The driver just come pack it. Then once he gets inside, I kick, I move. So from there, then I had my father died. Then I have to do the burial, everything. Then I have to come back home. So on my way sleeping, I just surprised to see that CID surrounded me. That my mother arrested, and I followed them down to the station. So when we get there, I also denied them. I said I should look for a person to take me on bail. When we get to court, then take me on bail. So from there, I was having a friend, which is Kisleya Weka. So there's one certain day like that. Iyamu and some other people, they just drive there. Then my car was inside that compound. Then Iyamu have to send a message that is looking for me. Then he arrested about 4 of them in that compound. When he arrested all of them, he carried them down to prison custody. Then from there, he said, if I know I can have money to bring them out, he can help me. Then I said, well, I don't have money, but the money with me is only 20,000. Then he said, no, he said you need 50,000. Then I have to give you that 50,000. Then they have to move. He said, well, you leave me alone. Then I go with my car. Then after small time, getting pillow for me. So from there, I started all the trouble. Then from there, later on, I heard that they killed a Kisleya worker in Fari Squad. And I went to Iyamu's house. That, Abba, the money I've spent since then, how do you do it? I heard that you are the, whether it was robbery, I don't know the rank you have there. Why don't you go up with the money and save the boy? Then he said, by now, at any time he captured me, he must kill me. Then from there I have to escape. Then right from there I started escaping from Iyamu. Then to the extent he come to my village one certain day. When he come, he met 10,000 under my pillow when I was sleeping. Then I have to escape. Leave the money there. Then he took the 10,000. Then he have to carry my father's house, beat him, break her leg, go to my mother's house, beat him, break her leg. Then I have to escape. Then I bust out at Saple. Because if you are in our village, very close to Saple, then I have to escape. Then from there, started running for Iyamu. Then Iyamu, at times, once he just heard you are here, he will just organize, within our boys, carry rifle, everything, just organize, then he will just go to that house. If you know you have money, then he can just finish you, say you are about of escaping. Then you will go in, then you will just go with the money which is collected from you. You know, this was hesitant. Then I said, well, instead of Iyamu to catch me and kill, may be a difficult thing. Then I was escaping from.
The summer of 1986 in Bendel State became a calendar of carnage as the Anini gang escalated their attacks with a brazenness that shocked the international community. No longer content with midnight raids, they began operating in broad daylight, driving through the streets of Benin in stolen Peugeots, firing into the air to announce their arrival like conquering kings. On one afternoon, they struck a bank in the heart of the city, not with the stealth of burglars, but with the violence of a commando unit. They didn't just take the money, they showered it on the crowds in the nearby market, creating a chaotic Robin Hood persona that made them folk heroes to some and demons to others. This calculated act of charity was a brilliant tactical move, as it turned the local population into a human shield and an intelligence network that would alert them to police movements long before the sirens were even heard. The police, meanwhile, were so paralyzed by fear and internal betrayal that they began to abandon their posts, leaving the citizens to wonder if the government had simply surrendered the state to the Anini Republic. The violence reached a fever pitch when the gang targeted the commissioner of police, Casimir Akagbosu, in an audacious ambush that left him wounded and the nation in a state of emergency. This wasn't just a robbery, it was an assassination attempt on the authority of the state itself. The audacity of shooting a CP in his own territory was the turning point that forced the military government under General Ibrahim Babangida to take the situation as a personal insult. At a meeting of the Armed Forces Ruling Council, Babangida famously turned to the Inspector General of Police, Etem Inyang, and asked, "My friend, where is Anini?" This single question, broadcast to the entire nation, became the catalyst for the largest manhunt in Nigerian history. The pressure was no longer just on the local Benin command. The entire weight of the Nigerian military and intelligence apparatus was now shifting its focus toward a single house in the back streets of Benin, where the law was hiding behind his charms and his women. Despite the mounting pressure, Anini and Osunbor seemed to thrive on the chaos, even sending letters to the police mocking their inability to catch them. They were living in a state of high-stakes adrenaline, fueled by the belief that their spiritual protections and their inside connections made them untouchable. But the unholy Trinity was starting to fray at the edges, as George Iyamu grew increasingly nervous about the national spotlight shining on his district. The relationship between the bandit and the policeman began to shift from cooperation to a desperate struggle for survival, as Iyamu realized that dead men tell no tales, and Anini realized he was becoming too famous to hide. The charms that Anini relied on were nothing more than the silence of his neighbors and the corruption of his handlers, two things that were quickly evaporating as the reward for his capture reached astronomical levels. The stage was set for the final confrontation, a battle that would not take place on the highways, but in a small, nondescript room on 2nd East Circular Road. By December 1986, the walls were finally closing in on Lawrence Anini, and the source of his downfall was as old as time itself, the betrayal of those closest to him. The police had finally stopped relying on standard patrols and started using the one thing that never fails: money. Informants began to surface, emboldened by the massive bounty and the realization that the Anini era was reaching its inevitable, violent conclusion. Acting on a precise tip-off, a crack team of police officers led by Superintendent Coyote Uwanarero surrounded a house on 2nd East Circular Road. They knew that if they gave Anini even a second of warning, he would use his knowledge of the city's alleyways to vanish once again. This time there would be no sirens and no warnings. The hunters moved with the silence of predators, closing off every exit and positioning marksmen on the surrounding rooftops. Inside the house, Anini was not the fearsome warrior the public imagined. He was in the company of women, relaxed and unsuspecting, believing his charms had once again blinded his enemies. When the police burst into the room, the legend of Anini's invincibility vanished in a hail of gunfire. He tried to make a break for it, leaping through a window and attempting to scale a wall with the agility of a man half his age, but Uwanarero was ready. He leveled his submachine gun and fired a burst that shattered Anini's left leg, dropping the king of robbers into the dirt like a common criminal. There was no magic, no disappearance, and no turning bullets into water. Only the screams of a man in agony and the sight of the most wanted man in Nigeria crawling in the dust. The police didn't just kill him immediately. They wanted him alive to talk, to expose the network that had sustained him, and to serve as a public example of the state's restored authority. As he was dragged into the back of a police van, the crowds began to gather, not to cheer his generosity this time, but to catch a glimpse of the fallen idol who had bled like any other mortal. The capture of Anini sent shockwaves through the corrupt underground of the police force, particularly for George Iyamu, who now knew his days were numbered. Anini was taken to a military hospital where his leg was amputated to save his life, a procedure that would ensure he could never run again. From his hospital bed, the law began to sing, and his song was a confession that implicated high-ranking officers and revealed the depth of the rot within the system. He detailed every meeting with Iyamu, every gun provided, and every tip-off that had allowed him to escape previous ambushes. The betrayal was complete. The bandit had turned on the policeman, and the policeman had been exposed by the very monster he helped create. The investigation that followed was a surgical strike against corruption, as the authorities realized that the Anini Saga was not just about a gang of robbers, but about a system that had allowed itself to be bought and sold by the highest bidder in the motor park. The trial of Lawrence Anini, Monday Osunbor, and George Iyamu was more than a legal proceeding. It was a national catharsis, broadcast on television and followed by millions of Nigerians with the intensity of a World Cup final. The courtroom in Benin City was a fortress, guarded by soldiers with fixed bayonets to prevent any rescue attempt or any further embarrassment to the state. Anini, now a frail figure in a wheelchair, presented a stark contrast to the flamboyant bandit who had terrorized the highways just months before. Beside him, Osunbor remained stoic, his eyes cold and unmoving, a man who seemed to have accepted his fate long before the judge even walked in. But the real spectacle was the presence of George Iyamu in the dock, a high-ranking officer of the law being accused of arming and protecting the very criminals he was paid to catch. This was the moment the public had been waiting for, the confrontation between the street and the state, and the exposure of the hidden hand that had fueled the summer of blood. Under the relentless questioning of the tribunal led by Justice James Omoage, the details of the gang's operations came out with chilling clarity. Anini at Osunbor described their robberies with a detached precision, but it was their testimony against Iyamu that carried the most weight. They spoke of tax payments made to the DSP, of weapons exchanged in the dead of night, and of specific instructions given to them to kill certain police officers who were getting too close to the truth. Iyamu, for his part, tried to maintain a facade of innocence, claiming he was being framed by desperate criminals, but the evidence was overwhelming. The charms that Anini had bragged about were finally explained not as occult magic, but the very real protection provided by a corrupt officer who had traded the lives of his colleagues for a share of the loot. The trial stripped away the mystery of the Anini gang, revealing them to be what they always were, a brutal group of opportunists sustained by a failing system and a lack of moral compass. The final verdict was never in doubt. The weight of the evidence and the public's demand for justice made any other outcome impossible. Justice Omoage sentenced Anini, Osunbor, Iyamu, and several other members of the gang to death by firing squad. As the sentence was read, the courtroom erupted in a mixture of cheers and somber reflection as the reality of the impending execution settled over the defendants. Anini reportedly wept, the law finally broken by the true law he had so arrogantly mocked. Iyamu, the man who had traded his honor for blood money, stood in a state of shock, realizing that his uniform would not protect him from the stake. The trial had done its job. It had restored a semblance of faith in the judicial system and sent a clear message that no one, not even a DSP, was above the reach of justice. But the true end of the story would not take place in a courtroom, but back at the execution grounds where it all began. The execution of Lawrence Anini and his gang did more than just remove a group of criminals from society. It served as a brutal, necessary correction for a nation that had lost its way. When the bullets finally tore through the silence of that March morning, they didn't just end the lives of Anini and Osunbor, they shattered the myth that crime without consequence was a sustainable way of life in Nigeria. The image of the invincible bandit slumped in a chair, broken and bleeding, became a powerful visual deterrent that echoed through the motor parks and markets of West Africa for decades. It was a reminder that while the law of the streets might provide a temporary throne of stolen naira and hollow fame, the true law of the state, when finally awakened, is a relentless and unforgiving force. The Anini Saga became a permanent entry in the annals of Nigerian criminology, a case study in how poverty, corruption, and the failure of leadership can create a vacuum that monsters are all too happy to fill. The take-home lesson from the life and death of Lawrence Anini is one of systemic accountability. His rise was only possible because of the corruption of men like George Iyamu, who proved that the most dangerous weapon in a criminal's arsenal is not a gun, but a badge. This story teaches us that a society is only as safe as the integrity of its protectors. When those meant to hold the line instead sell the line, the entire community pays the price in blood and fear. Anini was a criminal, yes, but he was also a symptom of a deeper sickness, a sickness that prioritized quick wealth and personal gain over the collective security of the people. To prevent the rise of the next Anini, we must look not just at the bandits in the bushes, but at the offices and the systems that allow them to flourish. True crime relief comes not just from a firing squad, but from a society where justice is accessible, the police are honorable, and every citizen feels they have a stake in the law. As we close this chapter on the most notorious saga in Nigerian history, we are left with the haunting image of the stake and the silence that followed the gunfire. Anini's story is a tragedy in every sense of the word, a waste of life, a waste of potential, and a period of immense suffering for the people of Benin City. But in that tragedy, there is a clear warning for the future. The road of crime is a road with only one destination, and it always ends at a dead end. We must choose to build a nation where the law is something we respect, not something we fear or manipulate. If you have been captivated by this deep dive into the dark side of history and want to see more real-life stories that explore the complexities of justice and crime, there is only one way to ensure you don't miss our next investigation. Thank you for staying with us through this journey into the heart of the Anini Saga. If you found this story powerful and want to see more content like this, please hit the subscribe button right now and turn on the notification bell. Join our community as we continue to tell the stories that shaped our world. See you in the next episode.